The Joyful Friar podcast is made possible by the generous support of our friends. To support the podcast, please visit nathan-castle.com and donate today. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. I'm Father Nathan, your host, and I'm more joyful than normal today because I have a guest that I'm always happy to be around, although we were just talking before getting started that we think we've only been together virtually. We've known each other for a number of years, but always through something like this, something online, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But I think you're best known now, Yvonne Kason, through Spiritual Awakenings International, the organization that you founded, but you have a lot of other things to your name that maybe you'll go into. Tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm Dr. Yvonne Kason. I'm a retired medical doctor and a psychotherapist, and I used to be on faculty at the University of Toronto. I'm currently talking to you from Toronto, Canada, even though my background is Switzerland because I have Swiss blood in me as well. But yes, I was the first Canadian medical doctor to specialize my practice in the counseling and research of patients having near-death experiences and other types of spiritually transformative experiences. And that happened in 1990 after I had a strong mystical experience that I call my calling mystical experience. But so I've been very active in this field for many, many years. But how it started, and I think that's where I'd like to lead in now, is because people always say to me, now, how could it be, a traditionally trained Western medical doctor at a conservative university? How did you end up specializing in spiritually transformative experiences, which is actually a phrase that I coined back in the 90s? And how that happened was by these very powerful experiences that I was having personally. Now, I was raised in a Christian household, a Protestant Christian household. So I had very sort of traditional, I think, Christian ideas of death and, what God was, an old man who sits on a throne with a long white beard and he would judge us after we die, etc. And as a child, I accepted that. That was what I was taught. But when I was a young doctor in 1979, I was 26 at the time. I was assigned on a medevac, a medical evacuation of a critically ill patient in Northern Ontario, Canada, in a small airplane, a twin engine aircraft called a Piper Aztec. We flew into bad weather. We flew into a blizzard, and the study they did afterwards to figure out what caused the crash, because we crashed, was they think the storm made the air filters for both of the propeller engines freeze over. And basically what happened is we're flying in this storm in this tiny aircraft. First one engine stopped, then the other engine stopped, and then the plane started crashing. And it's a tiny little plane. There's the pilot, there's me, there's the nurse, there's the patient, there's an oxygen tank, and the plane was full. And as the plane was being buffeted by the winds of the storm and going down towards the ground, I mean, it was clearly obvious to me we were crashing. Both engines had stopped. And my immediate feeling in my heart was intense fear and panic,
Of course.
just a wave of fear and panic. And it was like a reflex that just came out of my heart. I didn't say it out loud. It just was like a thought out of my heart and mind was, oh God, help, I'm going to die. And interesting. It seems to me now, looking back, that was close enough to a prayer.
It started with, oh God.
Yeah, that's right. That is actually when my near-death experience began. It began before the plane crashed, as it was going down. As soon as my heart said, oh God, help, I'm going to die. All of a sudden, what started happening was this force field of peace started descending on me. And it literally felt like it was pushing down the fear. And then I became incredibly peaceful. incredibly calm, had no fear at all. And I heard a very clear inner voice. And I'd never heard inner voices before this in my life. I was 26 at the time. And the very clear inner voice with a masculine sound said, "Be still and know that I am God.
Hmm.
I am with you now and always." And it wasn't just words, it was the vibration that came as I heard those words was of safety, of peace, of protection. And I mean, I wasn't intellectually analyzing it. I was like in the moment, in the experience, but I'm fully alert. The
Hmm.
plane hasn't crashed yet. I was now feeling, I guess the best description would be divine protection or divine
Yeah.
presence, totally safe. And everyone in the plane, the pilot was trying to steer the plane and get it restarted, and the nurse, she was sort of freaking out, and the patient, she'd regained consciousness, and she looked up at me with really, really frightened eyes. And I remember that I was in such a state of peace and calm. I just instinctively, I started comforting her. I spoke to her because I was feeling such peace. I said, "There's nothing to be afraid of. Everything's going to be okay." And somehow I knew that to be true, whether we lived or died in the
Yes.
plane crash.
What,
Yeah.
wouldn't you wish that for everybody? Yeah. Yeah.
So to me, it's, you know, God is great. My near-death experience happened before the crash, so that I was already in that state of love and peace and feeling protection
Yes.
when the crash occurred. And the pilot really, really heroically, and I'm sure aided by his guardian angels or whatever, was able to steer the free falling plane and avoid crashing into the trees, because this is a heavily forested region in northern Ontario. And he guided us away from the trees onto tried to do a belly landing on a semi-frozen lake. He was sort of partially successful. He pulled up the wheels and he was got the plane down on its belly. We were sliding across the lake. But right when the plane came to a stop, the weight of the plane broke the ice, and the plane very rapidly nosedived and sank into very, very deep water. So we had to quickly scramble out of the plane. I and the nurse tried desperately to get the patient out of the plane, but we couldn't. Her stretcher had been strapped into the plane, so unfortunately, she went down with the plane. And the nurse, the pilot, and I found ourselves now in open water, and between us and the closest shore, there was open water with a strong moving current. We had crashed in a place, Lake of the Woods, near Kenora, Ontario, which is called Devil's Gap.
Oh, perfect.
And this place is called Devil's Gap because of the strong current. It's very treacherous, both in the winter and in the summer, but it's winter, and the ice was not frozen between us and the shore. I would have to swim the Devil's Gap to get to shore. I mean, I
It
found
wasn't frozen because the current was too strong
so
for the
strong. That's
ice
right.
to form.
That's right. And going away from shore towards the open lake, there was some ice. We didn't know how thick it was, and we later found out it was thin. But anyway, the pilot started shouting to myself and the nurse, "Try to get on the ice, try to get on the ice." And the voice in my head now spoke again. And it said very clearly, "Swim to shore." Now, I was young. I
Yes.
was inexperienced in spiritual experiences.
Yeah.
So I didn't like listen to the voice. In fact, mentally, I argued.
Oh,
And,
perfect.
and I remember thinking, I didn't know what this voice was. I'm going to swim to shore. I took lifeguarding. They tell you in lifeguarding, in a boating accident, don't swim to shore. You're going to drown on the way to shore. I'm not going to try swimming to shore. And so the voice repeats, "Swim to shore." And I went, "Oh, no way."
Uh,
So I didn't know any better. Hopefully, I've learned the lesson since then. Always follow clear inner guidance.
Yeah.
Anyway, I tried to get on the ice, but it was really clear. I was getting more exhausted and more exhausted trying to get on the ice. The ice was just too thin. And the voice repeats a third time, swim to shore. And
You
so
were
finally,
probably wearing winter clothes to begin with, weren't you?
I was. So it's sub-zero weather in a storm. The water's choppy, and I'm wearing a heavy winter parka, heavy boots, and they're carrying me down into the water like lead weights. Like it was
Yeah.
really fortunately, taking all my energy to keep my head even above water. Fortunately, at that age, I was an extremely strong swimmer, and swimming laps of front crawl was my favorite exercise. So, God prepared me. I didn't know, but for this rigorous swim to shore. So finally, the third time the inner voice said, "Swim to shore," I finally surrendered to that wisdom, and I started swimming to shore. Now, it was a really hard and a really difficult swim, and I went under several times, just from exhaustion and the weight of my clothes pulling me down. But I would, with every bit of energy in me, kick and try to get my mouth and nose above water again, and then stroke by stroke, I was struggling to swim to shore. And partway to swimming to shore is when my near-death experience deepened. That's the vocabulary we use in researching it. It deepened. And what happened was, all of a sudden, I heard this really loud sort of roaring noise, like the roar of a waterfall. And I felt my consciousness rise up out of my body. And you've probably heard other stories of near-death experiences where people are up above looking down at their body.
Yes.
But mine was a little bit different because it was actually like my consciousness was two places at the same time. Because my body wasn't dead. My body was still very, very actively trying to swim to shore. What it was actually like, I compare it to a split screen TV where you have a big image and a small image.
Yes.
So the small image, a small part of my consciousness, was still in my physical body that was desperately stroke by stroke trying to swim to shore. But now the big image, most of my consciousness had risen up above my body and was no longer in my body. And then the major portion of my consciousness rose even higher. And I rose into this place or state or realm, I don't know what to call it. What I began to experience was this incredible realm that was filled with profound, unconditional love. I just felt basked, permeated, enveloped, bathed in this profound love, unconditional love. And the realm was also filled with light. I mean, people talk about the light. It was a dark and stormy day, but this was a beautiful, soft, glistening white light realm. For a second, I saw a face of light sort of in the periphery, and then it faded into the cloud-like glistening periphery. And my soul instantly recognized what I was experiencing. It's not like somebody told me or explained it to me. It was, I can only say that somehow my soul or my heart recognized. I knew that what I was experiencing was the love of our higher power, what I had been raised to call God.
Yeah.
And what I was actually experiencing God to be was far more beautiful than what I had been taught.
Mhm.
It was not a judgmental old man, not at all. What I was actually experiencing God to be was this infinitely intelligent, infinitely vast, infinitely loving, like force field that was interpenetrating, underlying all of creation, everything, all of us, and past, present, and future. It was a profoundly beautiful, expansive experience.
Mhm. While you're almost drowning.
My physical body is still struggling to swim to
Yeah.
shore. Yeah.
Right.
And then so while I was in this white light realm, I again somehow just knew things, not by somebody saying it. It was like suddenly I just knew things. Like I absolutely knew that what I think of as me, or what we might call my soul, that I would live on whether my physical body down below survived or did not survive
Yes.
the drama that was unfolding.
Right.
And so I was sort of detached, sort of like when you're watching a TV show. It was, yeah, is this person going to make it to shore or not? That whether this person was able to swim to shore or not, I was going to be fine because I was home. I was in the light.
Yeah.
I was in God's embrace, if we want to put it that way.
Right.
And so I watched with detachment and curiosity to see, because I understood this is all the divine play unfolding in some way.
Yes.
How is this divine drama going to unfold? How is God ending this particular episode of Yvonne Kason? And 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 the other thing that I understood so beautifully while I was in the light, feeling God's profound love, is that we're all loved this way. All of us, all of us are loved with this incredible love. That it's not just people who are understanding or trying to understand God through one particular religious tradition or philosophy or whatever. Like, God gets it.
Yes.
None of us have the total picture that all of us are loved and that we're all striving, like climbing a mountain from different angles. That it may look like you're very far apart when you're at the bottom of the mountain, but when you get up to the top of the mountain, when you're in the white light realm, you go, oh, it's the same place we were shooting for, but just from different angles, from
Right.
different perceptions, different backgrounds. So I remained in this profoundly beautiful white light realm of love until my body was later rescued and resuscitated. Now, there's a long story. I'm not going to go into all of it today because I want to have time to tell you about my most recent near-death experience too. But through I did manage to swim to shore through the grace of God, and through a whole bunch of coincidences, if you believe in coincidences, there happened to be a plane just directly overhead us, a regular Air Canada plane that heard the SOS message that the pilot had sent out when we crashed. And nobody could have heard it because of the storm and the hills
Yeah.
unless they were directly overhead. But guess what? There was
Yeah.
a
You
plane
were. Yeah.
directly overhead. And then the message was relayed down to the ground. And we had crashed in an area and swum to an island that could only be accessible by helicopter because it was not accessible by road. It was not accessible by boat. It was an island. So the only way to get to us would be a helicopter. And normally there's no helicopter in that area at all. So again, by coincidence, a helicopter had been flying from, somewhere, I don't know, Saskatchewan over to Quebec, but it set down because of the bad weather 5 miles from where we crashed.
Uh,
So there was a helicopter in the area. And by coincidence, they had the radio frequency on, so they heard the relayed message. It came down to the ground and then relayed around. Is there anybody around? There's a plane crash approximately here. The pilots met another pilot who'd been grounded. The two of them, they didn't even know each other. They set off in the helicopter, risking their own lives, going into a storm. They knew exactly where to look for us. They found us. I mean, to me, that was the hand of God, that all of these coincidences, the message and the relay and the helicopter and these two men not even thinking about their own lives, risking their lives to look for complete strangers. And they rescued us. They brought us to the closest hospital, which was in Kenora. I remember floating above my body, watching them as they came, a helicopter landed on the driveway of the hospital, and the emergency staff came out with their little their little the beds on wheels, that they put people on, so the stretcher. So they put me on a stretcher and they wheeled me in, and they realized I was so hypothermic. I was almost frozen to death. My body temperature was so low. I was below the bottom reading on their mercury thermometer. So they took us to the physiotherapy department, put us in the hot water, finally put me in the hot water of the physiotherapy whirlpool bath. And as my body was being reheated is when I felt my consciousness re-enter my body. And what that felt like was like how they depict a genie being sucked into a bottle. It was like I'd
Right.
been at this big expansive space above my body, and suddenly whoosh, I was sucked back through the top of my head into the small confines of my body. And then I knew I was back and that I was meant to live. And yeah, so that was my first adult near-death experience. And it changed the course of my life.
Mhm. Did you write about it right away?
No, no. It took me many years to even figure out and give a name to what had happened to me. You have to
Mm,
remember this was back in the 70s.
right.
And I as a young medical doctor, I went around and I asked my medical colleagues, have you ever heard of anything like this? And all my medical friends, they were real interested to hear, my medical doctor friends, but nobody had heard of anything like this. So everybody came up with a hallucination idea, that
Uh,
I hallucinated because of the effect of cold, or I had a low blood sugar, so I hallucinated.
that's too bad.
And
That would have been about 4 years after Raymond Moody's breakthrough book, Life After Life, but they weren't aware of it.
no, but even then, initial thoughts were it wasn't a near-death experience unless you were clinically dead while you had the experience. And I had not been clinically dead. In fact, I went to one person who said they were a near-death experience expert, and I said, was this a near-death experience? So, and this was back in '79, and he said to me, well, did you see a tunnel with a white light at the end? And I
All
went,
right.
no.
Yeah.
were you clinically dead? And I went, well, no, I was swimming to shore. I guess at worst I was maybe unconscious after I swam to shore. But then he said, this is not a near-death experience. I'm like, oh,
Okay.
okay. So I was searching, trying to find a name for my experience. And a few years earlier, I'd had a very strong meditation experience that I talk about in my book, which I now know was a Kundalini awakening with a mystical experience where I felt the Kundalini or Holy Spirit awaken in me, big rush of energy, and I went up into this expansive state of love and light. But the near-death experience was even more transformative than that, what I now call a Kundalini experience. So I was researching many types of spiritual experiences, and actually the first term I found that fit for my near-death experience, I was speaking with one of my medical colleagues who's a very devout Christian. Bless his soul, he's passed away recently. Um, and I told him about what I experienced in the plane crash, and he said to me, Yvonne, I think you've had a mystical experience. And as soon as he said that word, mystical experience, it was like ding, 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 ding. Yes, lights went off in my head.
Okay.
That finally I had a word to call my experience. So for many years, I called it my mystical experience that happened in the plane crash.
Yes.
And yeah, and that's what I called it. And it was very transformative. It totally launched my spiritual life into a much, much deeper stage. I, started reading from the Bible every day because I wanted to. It's like I had a spiritual hunger afterwards. I was also starting to read from other spiritual traditions. I was starting to read about the lives of saints, about the lives of mystics. It's like I had
Yeah.
this craving to understand what I had experienced and the after effects. And it literally created like a spiritual hunger in me.
Yeah.
And other things started happening too. I started developing what you would call gifts.
Mhm.
I found myself becoming increasingly intuitive and having very strong, sometimes clairvoyant experiences, clairaudient experiences, clairsentient experience, just knowing things that through the logical mind one wouldn't be able to know.
And by
After
that
that,
time, because of your study and reading in mystics, including Christian mystics, you would know that these things belong in the tradition you were raised in. And they belong everywhere.
Yes, that's right. But it's not mainstream knowledge, and it certainly was not part of my medical training.
Yeah,
And
sure.
so, yeah, so I lived a double life for many years. Like my outside life, I had a traditional Western medical practice. I was on faculty at the University of Toronto. I had a very successful career. I had many leadership positions. But in the closet, my private life was my spiritual quest, which
Hmm.
was a combination of my own spiritual practices, my prayer, my meditation practice, but also researching, reading everything I could
Right.
from many traditions about all kinds of spiritual experiences, because I was now having many kinds of spiritual experiences. Finally, uh, uh, you may know, I'm having a mental block for his name, Kenneth Ring, Dr. Kenneth
Sure.
Ring,
Hmm.
one of the founders of the Kundalini Research Network, not Kundalini, International Association for Near-Death Studies. I actually met him in California in 1990 at the founding of the Kundalini Research Network, but he was one of the founders of the International Association for Near-Death Studies, Dr. Kenneth Ring. And, I was still fairly young at that time. I was in my 30s and he's much senior, and I, felt um, I held him in very high regard, and I
Yes.
considered myself a novice in
Just about
comparison to
everybody
him.
does. He's one of the heavyweights for sure.
Exactly. And so I just said, could I talk to you about this experience I had in the plane crash? And he says, sure. He was always interested to hear people's stories. And so I was sort of had my knees knocking, a little bit frightened to tell him my conclusion. So, because my conclusion by this time had been come to that I think it was a near-death experience. And I think it's wrong to say that you have to be clinically dead to have a near-death experience, that you can
Yes.
also have them when you're close to death or facing death.
Good for
And
you. That because that kind of dogmatism is, because I'm a Catholic priest, I often have people around me that are saying, "Oh, I don't have any use for that doctrine and dogma," because oftentimes people feel like the definitions define them out of the picture.
well, exactly. And I disagreed with the definition, but I
Yeah.
was a little bit nervous to say to exalted Dr. Kenneth Ring that I disagreed with the definition and that I thought mine was a near-death experience. And it
All
was
right.
so wonderful. I love Kenneth. We've become great friends. Is that he just burst out laughing with this great sense of humor that he has. And he says,
Mm.
"Oh my, Yvonne." He says, yes, other researchers have come to the same conclusion that you have, that you do not have to be clinically dead to have a near-death experience. And yes, yours was a near-death experience. And then that was it. That was the official stamp of approval. From that point forward, I called it a near-death experience.
And how long had the phrase near death experience been in the lexicon anyway in 1979?
Not long.
About 5 years.
Hmm.
You know?
So,
So
but when I
it doesn't take long for us to get rigid in our definition.
hmm Well, Kenneth Ring played a huge part in my life. With that validation, I didn't care how many skeptics said no, it was not a near-death experience. I knew if Kenneth Ring said it was a near-death experience, it was.
Uh,
And-
I've seen that in my church life. Much of my career has been running campus ministry centers and local churches. And you can come into a new place and you need to learn, the lay of the land and what's what. And one of the things I learned is whatever we did last year is a tradition.
That's right. Things are constantly changing. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So anyway, so at that point in my life, it was about the day before I met Kenneth Ring that I had what I call my calling mystical experience, a very profound mystical experience where I felt spirit was calling me to come out of the closet. Because up until this time, all my research into spiritually transformative experiences, near-death experiences, had been like there was this brick wall between my medical practice and my spiritual life, that
Hmm.
it was time to blend the two together, and that I was to start advocating for people having all types of spiritual experiences, including near-death experiences, because harm was being done. Harm was being done by medical profession labeling these as psychosis, hallucinations, mental illness. Harm was being done by society labeling it as hallucinations, mental illness. Harm was being done by churches calling it work of the devil or
And
hallucinations. So,
this harm is being done to people who've already been traumatized
yes.
by the experience they went through.
And then they get further traumatized by people pathologizing it. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I felt such a strong calling from spirit. It was like I knew this was my life mission, is that I had to raise awareness about the reality of spiritual awakening. I'm going to use that general term, and that it is not a sign of mental illness.
Yes.
And so I did, and I started writing books, giving talks, etc. through the 90s. I went on and had many more spiritual experiences, and it was a really rewarding and fulfilling part of my life. I opened what was called the Spiritual Emergence Research and Referral Clinic in Toronto, and I invited doctors to refer people to me if they had patients with spiritual experiences they wanted me to counsel. I was flooded. I was flooded. I had a waiting list from that point forward for people who'd had diverse types of STEs wanting to see me. And near-death experiences is only one of the types of experiences. In fact, I found that was only about 10% of the people who came to see me. Many more were having mystical experiences. Some of them were having after-death communications. Some of them were having spiritual experiences in their dreams, like you were saying that you'd had. Some
Yes.
of them were having past life recall. There was a Kundalini Awakening, which sometimes they called it Holy Spirit activation or Chi activation, depending what tradition they were from. But I found, wow, this is really happening to lots and lots of people. And it was, to me, it was a gift from God that I was able to do this work, counseling these incredibly beautiful people that were going through spiritual awakening, helping them, healing whatever wounds they had to heal, whatever traumas they had to heal, because as you know, as part of the spiritual awakening process, these wounds and issues need to be healed. So they get exposed and need to be healed. So that was a big part of what my work was.
How did you choose the word awakening to describe that change in people's lives?
I can only attribute that to spirit.
Hmm. It's
I all
metaphoric,
Yeah, yeah,
but it's apt.
yeah. I always meditate, pray, and ask spirit to guide me if I ever have any major decisions in
Mm.
life. And coining the phrase spiritually transformative experiences, I coined that back in the 90s. That was, ultimately guided by spirit. And I still use that term, and I'm delighted many people are using that term as an umbrella phrase for all sorts of spiritual paranormal experiences. But even more accessible, it seems, is the simple phrase spiritual awakening.
Yes.
That because sometimes people are not having like a dramatic experience.
Yes.
Sometimes a spiritual awakening happens more gradually.
Right.
Or maybe they've had the death of a loved one, and then that gets them starting to question, gee, really, is there an afterlife? What
Right.
has happened to my loved one? So it's not like a positive spiritual experience that's causing them to spiritually awaken. It might actually be a trauma that's
Yes.
making them question and ask deeper
Or
questions.
it might be a series of things that happened that brought you to this place rather than something as dramatic as a plane crash.
Yes,
Uh,
exactly, exactly.
I grew up in Southeast Texas where I was
Mhm,
Roman Catholic, but lots of the surrounding religious culture was evangelical Christian. And very often, Catholic people would be approached by someone enthusiastic about their faith and say, or ask, "Have you been saved?"
mhm,
Well, they very often, the lyric in Amazing Grace,
mhm.
"I once was lost, but now I'm found, was bound, but now I'm free." It had the question had this presumption that you needed a dramatic story to tell,
Uh-huh.
like a plane crash, or
Yeah.
something. And I tried for a while because I went to a Protestant college, and many of the people there were evangelical Christian, and they would ask me that, and I tried to fit my story into their box, but eventually I gave up. I just said, you know what?
Yeah.
I've had spiritual experiences that are powerful and so on, but they don't quite fit that I was a wretch.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
And for some people it is true. For some people like people who were addicts that go into recovery, for I'm
yes,
just saying as an example,
of
that
course.
really they feel they were a wretch before they found Jesus or whatever their particular faith tradition is, and now they're in recovery.
Yeah,
um but that's part of the reason, I'm now, one of the things I did, you mentioned at the beginning, is in 2020 I founded Spiritual Awakenings International with with Dr. Robert Bear, and we're using the term spiritual awakening exactly for that reason, because it's even broader. You don't have to have a big experience to be in a spiritual awakening process. And I personally think, and I hope my thought is true, that the whole planet is actually in a spiritual awakening right now. It's
I
it's
certainly hear
happening.
that a lot.
Yeah, that is happening. Some people explosively, some people more gradually, some people on circuitous routes, some people more direct routes. But from my experience of the divine, having had now 5 near-death experiences and multiple mystical experiences, is that there is a beautiful, loving, divine plan for the universe. And how I have been shown, and how I understand what I've been shown by my glimpses on the other side, is that it's a happy ending story.
Yes. I refer to it as the cosmic happy ending. I really
Yes.
do believe that all will be well, like Hildegard of Bingen, all will be well.
Exactly, exactly. That there will be eventually, some people might take longer than others and have a more circuitous route than others, but that eventually there will be a happy ending for all souls. So I'd like to go into my most recent near-death experience, if I may,
Sure.
because it happened in no on November the 8th, 2003. So it was almost 20, it is 20 years now. My goodness, how time flies. But what happened that day is that I had a slip and fall accident on black ice at Niagara Falls. I hit my head on the rock cobblestone pavement. Nothing broke my fall. I suffered a serious traumatic brain injury, and I immediately died. Now, I want to just, I'm double checking how much time we have left
We have about
exactly.
20 minutes.
Okay, good. Because I want to explain that something unusual started happening actually about 2 hours before I died. And I now think, looking back, that that might have been my end of life experience. That spirit, although I didn't know it, was preparing me that I was going to be transitioning that evening. I didn't realize it. But what happened was, that evening, a friend and I had gone to Niagara Falls. There was a full moon eclipse that night. We thought it would be fun to watch the eclipse from Niagara Falls. They have beautiful restaurants with big plate glass windows where you can see the falls and watch the eclipse. But before having dinner, I went down to the base of the falls. On the Canadian side, they have big platforms there and tunnels. And I've always enjoyed meditating there because the roar of the waterfalls and the
Yeah.
vibration of the waterfalls, it to me sounds like the inner Om sound, the roar of the Om sound, which I can sometimes hear in meditation.
Well, you
And
mentioned it when you were describing your plane crash.
yes, exactly. And I've experienced it many times since. And I found that when I meditate at Niagara Falls, it's like a power spot, that Om
Yeah.
vibration. I go very deep, very quickly in my meditation. And I've been there many times, and I always meditate at the foot of the falls when I go there. And so that evening, though, as I was meditating at the foot of the falls, I went really deep, standing on the railing, holding by the railing, holding the railing, mist of the falls on my face. I went really, really deep, really, really deep. And I entered a state of communion where there was no longer any separation between me and the other side. I felt so blessed. And I saw a being of light, a saint. This is now with my eyes open. I'm in a state of ongoing mystical communion. And I saw a saint in his white light body. It was Mahavatar Babaji, a saint from my particular yogic tradition. And he telepathically communicated to me, "Welcome home." And I remained in this state of ongoing mystical communion for 2 hours. My friend and I went and we ate dinner. And I remember saying to my friend, because I didn't know I was about to die, all I knew was this is what the saints and mystics talk about. And through the grace of God, I'm experiencing that blessed communion right now. And I just very quietly said to my friend, I don't know how long this is going to last, but now that I've found my way home once, I know I'll be able to find my way home again. It is possible. Anyway, so I was in that incredibly beautiful state of mystical communion when 2 hours later, I slipped on black ice, fell, hit my head on the rock, and instantly died. And I felt my spirit being lifted up very rapidly by a force greater than myself. I was being rushed up through this dark, dark expanse of space to this white, like an opening to the white light realm. I knew where I was headed.
Did you have
That
a
white light
tunnel?
realm.
You needed a tunnel. You
No,
didn't
there was no tunnel. No, it
still
was
no
like it.
tunnel.
No, it was like a vast expanse, you know, a
All right.
dark expanse.
Yeah.
And for the first few seconds, I was aware that my body was on the ground behind me, but then I lost all awareness of the
Yeah.
body, dead on the ground behind me. And I entered the white light realm. And there at the entrance way to the white light realm were two beings of light welcoming me. And I recognized them immediately. They were saints from my particular spiritual tradition. It was Paramahansa Yogananda and Mahavatar Babaji. And they were in their light bodies, radiating light, and they telepathically communicated to me an understanding that my physical form had died, that the work in the incarnation as Dr. Yvonne Kason was now completed. And what it felt like a celebration. It
Uh-huh.
felt like a graduation party as I entered the light. There were other souls there in the light, but I didn't make out the identity of the other souls. I was aware that there were many souls that loved me. They were all like bubbles of light, I guess would be the best way to
Yeah.
describe it. And the love of the higher power. And I felt welcome and joy, and it was like, congratulations, you did it.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful. And interestingly enough, I felt like I had they had these images where you have a devil on one shoulder and an angel on one shoulder. It's like I
Yeah.
had a little devil on one shoulder, and that was my ego mind.
Uh-huh.
And I remember I had this thought, uh-oh, here comes my life review. Because, by this time in my life, I'd spoken to so many people who'd had near-death experiences, and many say that at their moment of death, that you get a life review. And I mean, I tried to live a good life, but who's perfect? And so there was this ego part of myself that was worried, like, uh-oh, here comes the life review. And it was interesting because the two saints, it's like they could read my thoughts. And one of them just glanced at me, and with the glance, it was like, the devil was blown away. And I got this incredibly beautiful understanding. And the understanding that came to me was that the love of our higher power God is so profound and so understanding and so unconditional that just like a loving parent understands when a child is learning to walk, it's going to make mistakes, it's going to stumble, it's going to fall, it's going to maybe skin its knees, it's going to maybe bump its head or break something. But the loving parent doesn't punish the child for these learning experiences. The loving parent embraces the child, comforts them, and says, "It's okay, sweetheart. Try again. You
Mhm.
can do better next time." That was the type of acceptance and love that I was being welcomed with on the other side. I mean, it was so beautiful. so accepting, so understanding. I'm almost in tears talking about it. So beautiful. And then what happened was my consciousness sort of shifted. And I shifted from a state where I was having strong visual images into a state of sort of expansive consciousness where I had the capacity to absorb vast amounts of information all at once. And how I sometimes describe this as a metaphor, it was as if my brain, because I'm pretty intelligent, as a Pentium 4 speed or functioning while I'm incarnated in my physical body, that suddenly my consciousness on the other side became like a Pentium 100, could just take in vast amounts of information all at once. And what happened was suddenly in this expansion, I remembered all my past lives all at once. And it was an incredibly beautiful experience because suddenly my incarnation as Dr. Yvonne Kason made sense to me because I had always wondered, why am I, this little doctor practicing in Toronto, having, Kundalini Awakening, mystical experiences, defining spiritually transformative experiences, 5 near-death experiences? Like, it didn't make sense to me why I was having all these experiences, because who am I? Like, I'm just a little person, right? And, but from the perspective of remembering all my past lives, I thought, oh, this is not my first lifetime as a mystic.
Uh,
This is not my first lifetime having near-death experiences. This is not my first lifetime having Kundalini awakening. That it on a soul level, my soul was continuing on in
yes.
the pattern that it had for many incarnations. And so it was like finally the shoe fit. Finally I knew who I was. And whatever role the divine plan casts us in, big or small, with humility and service, we play our role.
And because I've heard you share the story before, there was a lot of medical stuff to follow for that body that landed with a thud on the black ice. You endured a lot of medical care to get back to where you can talk to us now, didn't you?
Yes, I did. So let me wrap up this near-death experience, then I'll tell you a bit about the healing miracle that led me to where I am today. Because that's a beautiful part of the story too, that I give great gratitude to God for. So there were many things I could say about the other side, and I'll just say a couple of points before I go on to coming back into the body with the disability, is that time passed differently on the other side. That I had a very clear sense of, I understood how here on the physical plane we experience time linearly. There's the past, there's the present, there's the future. And that's quite rigid the way that we perceive it while we're incarnated on this plane. But on the other side, it was almost like I could perceive past, present, and future all at once.
Yes.
And it was really a matter of where I focused my attention. So if I focused my attention here, I would see what we here on earth perceive as the past. If I focused my attention here, I would see what we here on earth perceive as the present. If I put my attention there, I could see what we here on earth perceive as the future. And I could also see that time is very fluid on the other side, that time can bend, time can loop, the past can change, the future can change, all sorts of things that seem impossible
Hmm.
here are very possible on the other side, because time passes very, very differently there. Anyway, after a period of what I call timeless time, because the passage of time did not feel the same on the other side, in this incredible, expansive, and ecstatic state of consciousness, the two saints, the two beings of light, reappeared to me And they telepathically communicated to me, you may now choose whether to reincarnate in the body of a baby to further serve the divine, and or to return to the maimed form to further serve there. Now, my sort of a mantra or special prayer before I died was the prayer of St. Francis, make me a channel of your peace, make me a channel of your love. So for me to be given the choice to serve the divine this way or to serve the divine that way was a perfect choice for my soul, because my soul wants to serve the divine. And interestingly enough, I was shown no details of what was either incarnation would embodiment, I'll call it embodiment, would entail. But immediately my heart, which was just so open and in such a state of surrender and in a complete state of trusting the beauty of the divine plan and the intelligent wisdom of the divine plan, my heart just immediately responded, oh, masters, please guide me. What
Mm.
is the higher choice?
Yeah.
I want to do God's will. And so lovingly, very, very, like, just how a thought can have so much love inside the thought is hard to describe here, but it was just with exquisite love and tenderness. The response telepathically came back to me. It will be more difficult, but to return to the injured form. And immediately, no questions asked, my heart and soul just responded, I accept. And boom, it was so fast. It was between the I and the accept that with a gasp of air, I found my soul back in my body, lying on the ground there in Niagara Falls, trying to breathe some life back into it. For the first few minutes, I could see both realms with my eyes open. I could see the white light realm and the saints. With my eyes open, I could see it. It was like it was superimposed on the physical realm, like a double exposure photo, right? I could see
Yeah.
the white light realm completely exposed on the earthly realm. And then what happened is slowly with time, the white light realm started fading, 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 fading until it just became a little dot in my consciousness, which is still there. And then there I was in a body waking up that had a serious traumatic brain injury. I'd had a brain hemorrhage and a serious traumatic brain injury, which had killed me, but through the grace of God and God's design, I was sent back. Now, I was very seriously disabled because of this traumatic brain injury. I went to neuro rehab a total of 7 years trying to get back the ability to be a doctor, to function in the world the way I had before, to write books, to talk, to counsel patients. But, at about 3 years, I had to realize, for whatever reason in the divine plan, I am now a disabled person. And, so there were many challenges with that, which we really don't have time to discuss today, but I want to get to the miracle that happened. I came to a point where I had to accept that for whatever reason in the divine plan, I would now be a disabled person in the world, and that how I could serve the divine was not through being out in the world as I'd been previously, but through my inner life, through my prayers and my meditation. So that became how I came to understand my service would be, is through my prayers and meditations for
Mm-hmm.
others. And I accepted that and I deeply embraced it. Well, I still tried to get better physically, but right when you think you figured out God's plan, God always has a surprise for you.
Yeah.
Because 12 years later, in 2016, February 24th, 2016, when I was deep in prayer and meditation in Encinitas, California at the Self-Realization Fellowship Meditation Retreat, I experienced a miracle. Suddenly, there was this explosion of light in the center of my brain, and I had this subjective feeling of waking up. It's like the center of my brain had been asleep for 12 years, and my brain was healed.
Mm.
And I was given the very strong inner message, pass on what you have learned. And it was like the creativity for writing books was just flooding my consciousness. I wrote two new books very rapidly after the healing. I wrote this one here, Touched by the Light, my synthesis of all kinds of spiritually transformative experiences, and then this one afterwards, Soul Lessons from the Light, which is my personal spiritual awakening journey. And then Spirit gave me a download after these two were written saying, found a new organization, and I was even given the name Spiritual Awakenings International. And Robert Bear had also received a download from Spirit. He's also a multiple NDE experiencer, that we were to found this organization together. So we did. In June of 2020, we founded and launched Spiritual Awakenings International to be a multi-faith, non-aligned, educational, not-for-profit, raising awareness around the world about spiritual awakenings of all kinds, and that these are not mental illness. They're actually the opposite. Right. They're mental health. These are peak human experiences. So that is a synopsis of how I started off as a traditional trained medical doctor, a plane crash, head injury, miracle healing, and am now the president of Spiritual Awakenings International.
Well, I applaud you're getting all that into an hour. I'm on a university campus and I can hear it's chiming the hour. So we just got to the top of the hour. I want to make sure, yeah, I'm a member of SAI, and one of the main things that I've taken part in is the annual conference that comes up in early June. But there's a lot of other offerings going on all the time in both English and in Spanish. So let's do a plug on how people could be involved in that if they wanted to.
Awesome. Okay. Well, first off, the URL is spiritualawakeningsinternational.org. That's where you'll find us online. We're also on Facebook, on Twitter. Sorry, it's called X now.
X, yeah.
So you can find us on these various social media. TikTok, we have a TikTok channel now. YouTube, we have a YouTube channel. But we have a lot of information on our website. That's the first place I suggest people start, where you can learn about all types of spiritually transformative experiences, because many people aren't sure. They go, I wonder if mine is an experience or not. And if you look up the definitions, you go, oh, it is. I fit. I have found a place where I fit. But we also list the events that we're having. And right now, all of our events are online. And once a month, we have a featured speaker event, which is live online and followed by a live question and answer period online where you could ask your questions. And actually, we have one coming up this Saturday,
yes.
The third Saturday of each month. The first Saturday of each month, we have a experiencers sharing circle, where people can come and in a confidential place share about some of their spiritual awakening experiences. So that's been incredibly popular. And then the second Saturday of each month, we have Spanish events, and they alternate having a speaker about spiritual experiences in Spanish or experiencers sharing circle in Spanish. And then once a year, as you mentioned, we are having a conference. So we originally had thought we would have in-person conferences, but COVID came in 2020. Right. So we've been having online conferences. They've been such a great success. So it's usually the first weekend in June. And we will be doing it the first weekend in June again in 2025. In future, if someone gives us a nice grant so that we have some financial backing, we do hope to be able to do hybrid conferences so that it'll be in person for those people who are interested and have the finances and are able to attend in person, but also being streamed online for those people who would like to attend but are not able to physically attend. So that is our plan moving forward. I'm absolutely delighted at how Spiritual Awakenings International has grown, and we're now have subscribers in 99 countries around the world. We're shooting for 100.
All right.
On every continent except Antarctica, and to me, what that shows is that it truly is a global spiritual awakening.
Yeah.
And at Spiritual Awakenings International, we have people speaking from various spiritual traditions and backgrounds. And like at our last conference, I'm delighted that you were a speaker again, Father Nathan, with your work and your Christian perspective. But as you know, we had a Jewish rabbi also speaking at the conference. We had a yogic Swami speaking at the conference.
Sure.
So we try to do that. We try to have people from various traditions so that nobody will feel excluded, that it is a global spiritual awakening, but we honor and respect that everyone, we hope and pray, will find the path that resonates with their heart and that will lead them home.
Amen.
Mhm.
Well, that's a great place to conclude things. You did a masterful job of describing all of that and of giving a good plug there for Spiritual Awakenings International. So
Awesome.
I hope we'll collaborate on other things in the future. I'm sure we will. But thank you for
Awesome.
being a guest
And
here.
thank you for having me. And I just want to say to your audience that my recent book, Soul Lessons from the Light, is all about my stories. If you're interested in hearing even more details, that's where you're going to find it.
Okay, perfect. All right.
Mhm.
Well,
All right.
thank you for being with us today, and thank you, all of our listeners and viewers. Remember that I'm always praying for you. I particularly have a heart for woundedness and struggle. So wherever in your heart there's something that you're struggling with, know that I'm trying to be there in prayer to be of assistance. If you'd like to be in touch with me, the easiest way to do that is through my website, nathan-castle.com. If you're interested in the particular work that I describe in my books, I ask that you read one of them first before you inquire about it, because I very often will have a richer conversation if
I hope you
you've had a
enjoyed
chance to
this
do that.
episode of The
But for
Joyful
now,
Friar.
thank you for being with us
Please
today.
like,
This is Father
follow,
Nathan
and
Castle,
subscribe.
wishing you well and asking
You
God's
can
blessing
visit
upon
me
you.
at
Bye now.
nathan-castle.com. Send me a message by clicking the contact button. God bless.